So welcome to the Fruit and Nut Tree webinar, everyone. My name is Kelsey Nichols, and I am the Signal Boost Coordinator with ReForest London. Tonight's event is hosted by us, ReForest London, and we are joined by presenter Jessica Robertson from Craft Permaculture to talk about caring for your fruit and nut trees. So thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy you could all join us on this oddly snowy Tuesday. So just to start off with a little bit of background information, for those of you who don't know, ReForest London is a London-based charitable nonprofit that partners with the community to enhance the environmental and human health of the forest city through the benefits of trees. We're primarily known for public tree planting events, tree giveaways, and our school program, Seeds to Forest. But in addition, in 2019, we became the owners of a 14-acre property that we are transforming into the brand new Westminster Pond Center for Environment and Sustainability. It will be a hub promoting environmental excellence, sustainability, health, and well-being across our region by co-creating resources, services, and impactful programs. So the webinar that we're taking part in tonight is a part of the Westminster Pond Center. So it's a part of a program called the Signal Boost Initiative. So the Signal Boost Initiative allows us to dramatically increase the number of public and volunteer educational opportunities that are available in London. And the goals are to help people better understand their impact on the environment and to encourage people to take action on pressing environmental issues. So while the events will eventually take place at the Westminster Pond Center, we are able to provide online learning opportunities until the COVID shutdown ends. So this is the first in a series of online webinars and videos. And if you like this one tonight, we hope you'll join us for the next one by following ReForest London on social media or by checking out our website, reforestlondon.ca. Upcoming topics include native plant gardening, sustainability for business, a general tree care workshop, a webinar all about frogs and toads, and more. All right, so before I present Jessica, so she is from the Craft Permaculture company. They're a local company that empowers people to regenerate the earth while leading more fulfilling, connected lives. They offer educational workshops, design, consultation, and installation services to give clients low maintenance and sustainable gardening. All right, so that's a bit about a background for the program. So Jessica, you can go to the next slide. So just before we get going, I just wanted to let you know of a few logistical matters. So just so you know, if you can just keep your cameras off. I have muted everybody, so please do not unmute yourselves because we just want to avoid background noise as much as possible and be able to hear Jessica. And as far as questions go, you can ask questions anytime. On your right, you'll see that there's a chat box, and I think some people have already been writing in there. So yes, please let me know if you ever have any questions. I will address them as we go. If we have a lot of similar questions, I may kind of group them together. And then there's also going to be some time at the end for some more questions and answers. And we'll save all the chat box conversations so that if we don't have time to get to all of them, we'll be able to address them after the event. Now, I see one comment saying the audio is not great, so if anybody wants me to repeat anything, let me know. And I will also just let Jessica know if there's any times where she cuts out, because as you all know, internet does cut in and out a little bit sometimes. All right, so that's about it for me. If there's no questions, I am just going to pass it over to Jessica. Thanks so much again, everybody.
and I should turn on my microphone. I just wanted to say hi to everybody before I'm going to turn my camera off as well, so that I can just focus on the presentation and not worry about what you're seeing at my desk here. And sorry, I know that there's some people that are having trouble. I was just answering some questions from people who are having trouble finding the link to get to this go-to meeting. So hopefully people can continue to join as they find the links on Eventbrite. I know you had to click on a couple things to get to the actual link for the webinar. So this is the first time we're doing this, and so there'll probably be a few kinks. I will not be able to see the chats coming up as I'm presenting, but as Kelsey said, we'll have some breaks every once in a while, and she can kind of amalgamate the questions and throw them at me, and then there'll also be some time at the end allocated to questions, and then we can make sure we address everything. Okay, so I'm going to turn my camera off and do screen share. Okay, so done those two. So the agenda for tonight, we're going to cover 4 main areas. Pruning, we'll spend quite a bit of time on that, as I know that that's something that a lot of people are interested in and nervous about. So hopefully we'll quell some of that anxiety around it. We'll talk briefly about detecting and diagnosing problems. I'm not an expert on tree diseases and pests and stuff. So just some common sense things to think about and figure out what you're looking at. Then we'll talk quite a bit about holistic sprays, and then we'll end with some prep for winter, which seems like is never ending this year. What you need to do to help your trees get safely through the winter till next spring. So pruning. Why do we prune? There's 4 main reasons to prune. The first is to allow sunlight to reach all the fruit. So you're not going to have even ripening if you have too many branches blocking each other. And obviously we want our fruit to be tasty and nutritious, and so we need to get the light in there. Almost even more important is to allow breezes through to prevent fungal diseases. So after a rainfall event, you want to be able to dry the fruitlets and the leaves out as quickly as possible, so that you don't have fungal issues springing up. And a congested tree is definitely going to take a lot longer to dry. So making sure that we have open form is really important for that. And obviously sunlight helps dry things out as well. And then good structural frame. So I'll talk about what that looks like in a little bit, but basically we want to have strong branches that can support a heavy load of fruit, and that are spaced well to let that sunlight and airflow through, and to continue to produce over many years, and also to make it easier to pick. Most people in urban areas, like we're in, will be planting dwarf or semi-dwarf trees, or even super dwarf trees. But even then, there's still a lot you can do to keep your tree at a more manageable state for maintenance and picking. And then finally, to encourage fruiting. So pruning actually stimulates a bit of a stress response in the tree, and the fruit of the tree is its progeny, the next generation. So when it feels threatened, like it's lost some limbs, it sort of thinks, oh, I better make lots of babies so that my DNA can carry on to the next generation. So you're going to have more fruit production with pruning. So shaping our trees. The first thing to do is to look at the overall shape of the tree from a distance, kind of like when you're looking at artwork in galleries and museums, you have a very different perspective of the piece if you're standing right up close to it, or if you really step back and take it all in and envision it as one. You notice different things in it. So when we're looking at our trees, kind of step back, start further away, and look at where the limbs are and how they're going to fill the spaces as they get larger and branches grow into each other. Aim for tree calmness. So Michael Phillips, a lot of the teaching that I do comes from his work. In the handout, I know some people were having trouble or have said they didn't get the handout. So if we get to the end of the webinar and you haven't received a MailChimp email yet with the handout, then you can just send Kelsey or I an email and we'll get that off to you. So there's resources in the back of that list his books and some other ones. So don't take off so much of the tree that it goes into excessive growth trying to compensate. So you never want to take off more than a third of the tree at a time, or it will be too stressful for it. So dead branches don't really count for that, but any living tissue you're taking off, you want to minimize how much you take off in a season. And that's for the stress of the tree, but also because what happens then is that the tree sort of sends out water sprouts and really rapid growth in places that we don't necessarily want, trying to compensate for what's been lost. And then the ideal branch angle is between 45 and 60 degrees from the trunk. So I have a couple of videos that I embedded in here, since we can't do the usual hands-on walk around that I do on these workshops to look at different fruit trees. I took a couple of videos of myself doing some pruning, and I talk about this and that. But essentially, you want to, it's for the openness for sun and moisture, but also because it makes the branch stronger, so it can bear more weight, and it also makes it more productive the more horizontal your branch is. Some commercial growers even train their branches to be lower than horizontal, so they're pointing down, and you get more production off of those kinds of branches. So there's three main shapes that we train our trees to. There's also espalier, which I'm not going to get into in this webinar really, but that's basically training in 2 dimensions along a wall. So most of the fruit trees are 3-dimensionally trained in. So central leader, modified leader, and open vase are the 3 shapes. A central leader is used for apple and pears, palm fruit, and these fruit on older wood. They don't fruit on first year growth. So you need to think about that as you're pruning, that you're planning ahead for 2 or 3 years. Open vase is the next one. Peaches, nectarines, apricots fruit only on new growth, and they're usually pruned to an open vase. They also are more prone to fungal diseases, so you really want to have that openness to light and airflow. And Japanese plums are often trained this way as well. Modified central leader just doesn't have the same dominance of, if you look at the central leader, there's really one dominant trunk, and then it branches off of that. The open vase splits and is more open like a vase, and a V shape in the middle. And then the modified central leader kind of kinks off to the side, and then that main branch can zigzag back and forth over the years as you remove different limbs. So this is often used for cherries and European plums and sometimes apricots. So there's 2 main kinds of cuts. There's a thinning cut and a heading cut, and I'll show you a video of each of these. The other thing, before I get into the specifics of this, is about that nervousness that, it's kind of like a haircut. So people think that if they prune their tree properly, it's going to be the end of the world. The tree will die or will never produce. There are a few things that are important to keep in mind for the health of the tree. And the way we do our thinning cut is one of the most important ones. But generally, trees, it's a living organism. So it will keep growing and it will compensate for any major mistakes you make. And just like when, I gave my daughter her first haircut, it was pretty laughable and it grew back and then I got to try again. So the important thing for thinning cuts is to make sure that you're getting the entire branch off. I don't know if, Kelsey, can you see my mouse when I move my mouse over the screen? Like if I'm pointing at something on the...
Oh, I do. You know what? It's very small and black,
Okay.
but yeah.
Okay, so basically you're taking off the entire branch at an intersection. So they've got this black mark out a little bit further. I'll demonstrate in the video. But if you leave this stub here, that's what's going to kill your tree. You could cut the wrong branch off. It's not going to be the end of the world. Other branches will grow. You have other opportunities down the road to reshape it and train it the way you want as you learn. But what's important is that when you make this thinning cut, it is right up to these special cells of growth that are right at the main junction there, and that will allow the wound to heal properly. When you leave a little stub there, that will dry out and then eventually rot and will allow disease in. So you want that cut to heal over within 3 to 5 years at the most, or you're going to introduce disease into your tree eventually. So really that's the most important thing to worry about when you're pruning. Don't worry about cutting the wrong thing off, worry about how you make your cut. So the purpose of thinning cuts is to remove dead branches, to remove branches that are crowding other branches. As I said, this is where you're removing a branch right at the junction of another branch, and it really opens up the tree. So you could make a whole bunch of little cuts here at the end of the branch. Whoops. But that's actually going to spur more growth and make this thicker next year. Whereas if you want to open it up to the sun and the breezes, you want to cut it back to a place where you're opening it up and not spurring that excessive growth. So start at the top of your tree and then follow the sun's path down and think about how it's reaching all the different limbs. You can we're working in 3 dimensions here, right? So you can try and train, have your main scaffold branches coming off the trunk in all the way around the tree, so you don't have all your branches on the west side or something, or on the west and east side, but nothing on the north and south. So just making sure that you're getting full sun coverage there. Focus on crossing branches first. Well, as I said, dead branches. Anything that's crossing or rubbing each other is going to cause entrance for disease vectors as well. So we want to eliminate that. And of course, it's crowded. Limbs growing towards the center of the tree are going to be problematic down the road. They might be small when you're first looking at your tree, but the smaller the limb is when you make the cut, the better it will heal over. So, to look ahead 3-5 years down the road at what that branch is going to look like. And you want to remove anything that's growing towards the center of the tree. If there's a very narrow crotch angle on a limb, you would want to remove that as well if you haven't been able to train it. If it's still young enough, it's very easy to train a branch to open up that crotch angle. But if and you'll see in the demonstration tree that I used, there were some things that weren't done a few years ago that should have been, and so you just have to work with it at that point, or remove a limb that has a very narrow crotch angle. So overly tall leaders, overly tall limbs as well. So if you have, sometimes a tree will get really excited and shoot out tons of growth in a season, but then it's putting all this energy into getting tall and lanky, and it's not putting energy into fruiting, and you want it to be putting energy into fruiting and into developing a good root system. So cutting that branch back will start, it'll make the tree send energy into its roots, into its fruits, and also into expanding the girth of that branch. If you just let it keep getting long and lanky, it's very susceptible to breaking. If it does get fruit on it, it's not strong enough to hold that fruit, especially pears and apples. Not as much with cherries, but heavier, larger fruits for sure. So that's important. And then ultimately, once your tree's more established and has been fruiting for a few years, then you want to be taking off spent wood that isn't bearing well anymore. So with the peaches and apricots and things that fruit on 1-year wood, once that wood slows down and isn't producing, then you want to be removing those to spur renewal growth, so that you have more production coming up in the years ahead. So as I started with this one, but if it's done properly, then the wound will heal quickly and will be unlikely to introduce disease. So this is the most important thing, is how you do your thinning cut. It doesn't really matter if you take off the wrong branch. Cut your branch off your limb right off at the connection where it meets the main branch or the trunk, and do it when it's as small as possible if you can. And that's the most critical thing to take away from today in terms of pruning. So heading cuts. So this is where you, so we're not taking off the entire branch at the junction here. We're making a heading cut. So we're actually going to be, sorry, every time I move my mouse to point at something, it makes the slides jump. So we want to, this is for encouraging growth. So you see the tree in the top, where they've made those cuts with the black lines, and then the following seat, and then after that, it spurs new growth from those points and branching at those points. So these don't heal as well as a thinning cut, especially in larger diameter branches, because they don't have those special cells that are right around the union. So they don't really close over the same way. This can be done on leaders that are too lanky before they start bearing fruit. I talked about that a bit with the thinning cut, that just cutting back leaders or limbs that are too long and aren't putting on enough girth. So this might delay fruit production for a year, but it will make a stronger branch that will ultimately bear fruit for longer, for more years for you. It keeps fruit production happening closer to the trunk, which is stronger, makes for a stronger tree and easier picking too. Varieties that fruit at the end of shoots are cut back to encourage compactness and lateral branching. And then when you're making this cut, and you'll see this in the video, you want to look at where the buds are on the branch, and then pick your cutting point just past a bud that will grow in the direction you want your new growth to happen in. So we don't want growth happening back towards the center of the tree or towards another major scaffolding limb or something. So pick buds that will grow away from other branches or in towards the sun, or in the direction that you want them to go. So I am going to, I have to unplug my headphones so that you guys can hear this video properly. And I guess if you're having trouble hearing it, you can let Kelsey know, and then we can try and troubleshoot that. So there might be some more background noises from me, but let's.
Actually, Jessica, just before you start the film for the video, we have a question.
Sure.
It's, do you trim in the spring or fall?
I'll talk about timing in a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a whole slide on that.
Perfect.
Okay. So this is a cherry tree that was planted a few years ago and hasn't been pruned at all yet. And there's some major problems with it. It's doing pretty well, but there are some branches that are undesirable. And if we want more fruit, then we're gonna do some pruning on it to keep it healthy and productive. You can see that this is where the point of the graft was. So the branches above this point are the cherry that we want. This big branch, unfortunately, this nice healthy branch, is growing below the point of the graft. So we don't know what kind of cherries this will produce, if any. And so that's the first thing we're going to remove. And we're going to do a thinning cut on it, which means we're going to remove the branch at the base. You can see here, an old thinning cut was done here, and then those special cells and bark are growing over to slowly close that up. If you leave a little stub, which is the mistake that most pruners make, you leave that little stub there, it's just going to rot and dry out and bring infection into the tree, and the tree won't be able to close its wound properly. So you need to cut right up to this special bark that looks kind of like wrinkled skin. That's where you cut up to. I'll do a demo actually on this branch we're taking off. So this skin that's right around here is the special skin that's going to be able to, or the special cells that are going to easily, go in there, tighten that. So now this should be able to close over nicely. And the smaller the branch is when you take it off, the more easily that wound will heal. This was taken off when it was pretty big, so that will still take a couple years to grow over, unfortunately. And this one, I'm going to use a bigger tool for. Might make 2 cuts here to get as close as I can. If you take these branches and put them in a vase at home, they'll flower. You'll have a nice fragrant bouquet. So now I'm going to clean this up. Get a little closer to the, if I can. I might need my saw for that. Yeah. Okay, I'll do that later with my saw and get nice up close to that bark that will heal that over. It's too bad this wasn't cut when it was smaller, because now that's a big wound for the tree to heal. So these branches are suspect. I'm not sure what they'll be from, whether the rootstock or the kind of right at the graft point. So, and then this is a multi-cultivar tree, a 4-in-1. So it has Glacier, Bing, Stella, and Van. So obviously we don't want to cut those branches off. And really they're doing okay. One thing we would want to do is weight these down so that we have a better branch angle here. The closer this is up to the tree, the tighter this crotch angle, the less healthy, the less weight it can bear, and the weaker this union is. So if we pull this down for a year and let it grow out as horizontally as possible, then this will be nice, strong bark here, and it'll be able to withstand winds and heavy snows and ice storms and lots of fruit. With a cherry, you don't have to worry about heavy loads as much, but with an apple or pear, you can actually break the branches sometimes if there's a lot of fruit. Okay, so sorry about the background noise in that. It was on a fairly busy street, and okay, so this is and there was a bit of wind too. So, and I did go back with the saw afterwards and take the rest of that stub off, the larger limb that I took off. maybe actually, could people type into the chat if they need a little overview of what like how fruit trees are made, how, like, if they don't know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about graft and the graft union and the rootstock and the scion wood above. And then if there's a number of people that are unaware of that stuff, then Kelsey can let me know and I'll go over it quickly. So
one person so far said, sure, that would be great.
okay. Okay, so basically, if you took seeds from a Macintosh apple in your fridge and tried to grow them into a tree, you would get an apple tree, but the fruit would definitely not be a Macintosh apple. And it could be really gross and not very tasty. It could be good for cider. It could be, you have no idea what the fruit's going to be like. So if you want to have a particular tasting fruit, then you basically take the rootstock of you take a rootstock that has characteristics you want, like disease resistance and dwarfing characteristics, and it can grow in clay or it can grow in sand or whatever your site conditions are. And then on top of that, you graft on the scion wood, which is from basically a branch from a Macintosh apple tree somewhere in the world, or a Matsu apple, or a Bartlett pear, or what have you. So the union is where you're grafting those two different stalks together, the rootstock and the scion wood. And so anything that grows off below that union, the graft union, is going to be from the rootstock. And sometimes it can be very vigorous. Like in that branch I took out here was actually larger in diameter than the ones that we wanted to have on this tree. So I'm not sure when it started growing, but it was it was going gangbusters and taking a lot of nutrients away from the productive bearing limbs that we want to encourage. So yeah, they make nice vases in your house. They make nice floral arrangements in the spring, but they're not very useful other than that. So did I cover everything there? I think so.
We do have a few questions coming in.
Okay.
Maybe we can address some of those. First one, does ReForest London have any options available for on-site review of backyard trees? We don't offer any like in-person assessments, but we're always happy to receive pictures emailed to us, and we'll do our best to try and assess whatever your question is. What do you use to weigh down the branches typically?
So I'll actually demonstrate that in this little clip that we're going to watch. There are some other, after the clip, I'll talk about some other ways you can do it.
Okay. Just a couple more. A rabbit did a few of my trees in, but severely gurgling them in the winter. Can I cut off the leader above the girdled piece and graft it back to the rootstock or to the area the rabbit didn't destroy?
I'm not sure if I caught all of that. It was about a rabbit girdled the tree.
Okay.
And can you reattach higher up on the scion to the rootstock?
So yes, a rabbit girdled a tree severely. Can she cut off the leader above the girdled piece and graft it back to the rootstock?
That's an interesting question. I've never thought about that solution. You could try. Yeah, I mean, if it just happened this winter, the tree's been dormant, so there shouldn't be a huge loss of nutrients yet. So you would have to cut the rootstock off at like below where it was girdled, and you'd have to do a different kind of grafting. Like usually, the only grafting I've ever done, I'm using limbs that are the same size, and so I'm fitting them together. But your rootstock would probably be larger at this point than your scion wood is. So you would have to do, I don't know the name of the graft, but where you cut a little slit in, and and then you make a little V cut in the middle of the rootstock, and then you stick your scion wood in that and tape it up so it doesn't dry out. So yeah, that would be a great experiment to try and see if that works. I think it's still early enough that you can do that. Well, you actually want to wait until your buds are just starting to, if you see some green on the buds, that's when you want to do your grafting, because the sap is going to be flowing well at that point. If you do it right now, the tree's still dormant, and it'll just dry out. The union will dry out before it gets a chance to take hold. So wait a little bit longer till the snows have passed, and the buds are just greening up on the tree, and then that you can try it out. Let me know if it works.
Okay, we have one more question. How many cultivars can you have on one tree?
Brilliant question. I've seen like these beautiful, almost done by artists, where they're like these chimera trees that have tons of 20, 30 different cultivars on one tree. I've also I've heard that you can graft any stone fruit to any stone fruit, and you can graft any palm fruit to palm fruit. So essentially you could have Saskatoon berries and roses and apples and pears all on the same tree. Now in practice, I haven't tried this, but people I know who have tried it say it's not that easy to get the grafts to take. Generally, apple to apple and pear to pear works better, apples and oranges. And so your stone fruits would be your anything that has a pit, like peaches, plums, nectarines, apricots, cherries. Those theoretically can all be grafted together onto one tree. But again, theory isn't always the same in practice. It's something I'd love to experiment with, but I haven't had. I move too frequently, and it hasn't happened yet. Yeah, so you can have a number, and there are several nurseries that sell 4-in-1s, they're called. So combo trees that have 4 Asian pear varieties on one tree, or 4 cherries like this one. The cherries that I know that my supplier, my main supplier, Whiffle Tree Nursery, doesn't sell the 4-in-1 cherries anymore because they just weren't having a lot of success with them. This one has done all right, but when I planted for another client, didn't survive, or half of the cultivars on it didn't survive. So if you buy a 4-in-1 and you only end up with a 2-in-1, it's not exactly what you invested in. So they don't stock those anymore. But there are definitely 4-in-1 apples, 4-in-1 Asian pears. I don't know if European pears are as common to do a 4-in-1, but they're out there, yeah. And you can always experiment on your own too.
All right, that's all the questions for now.
Okay, great. So yeah, we'll show the thinning cuts, and then at the end of this video, you'll see how to one way to weight down the branches, and then I'll talk about some other ways afterwards. Berry tree that was planted a few years ago and hasn't been pruned at all yet, and there's some major problems with it. Sorry. We watched that one already. Okay, so we're going to talk about a heading cut now. We did some thinning cuts, and then we're also going to weight some branches down. So this branch of unknown source could be rootstock, could not be. We're going to leave it for now. But this I know is an important one to keep, because this is the band cherry. So I want to give this lots of room to grow. So I'm going to cut this one. I'm going to cut it back, not at the base. That would be a thinning cut. I'm going to do a heading cut. And if I do it here, then this branch will become dominant. If I do it here, this branch will become dominant. I don't want branches growing into the boards of the trunk. I want to direct the growth of this out from the base. So I'm going to choose this branch to be dominant, which is leaving a good gap from there. There's lots of room for the growth to grow. So I'm going to cut this off right here. And now this branch will become the main stem here. And if there's a nice gap there, there's lots of air can get through there, moisture can dry off so that we don't have root rot problems, sorry. One of the things you're thinking about when you're pruning is opening up the frame so that you have lots of sunlight coming in to ripen the fruit. But most importantly, actually, is the breezes to dry things out after rain to reduce fungal problems. I'm going to cut this one off as well to, well, maybe we'll weight it down first and then see what we want to do. I'm going to weight this one down. This angle's not bad, but it'll be a more productive branch if it's tied down on a more horizontal angle. And it's still thin enough. It's still thin enough that it's flexible and shouldn't have problems adjusting to that. I'm just going to do a loose, I'm not going to tie it tight around the trunk. I'm just going to do a loose knot. And this sisal twine will easily just decompose when it's, and by the time it decomposes, the branch will be done. It's very easy. You can use a brick or a rock or lots of different things to so now that'll open up that angle. We'll have a stronger join here, and it'll get more light in there as well. So then if I weight this one down, I'll probably want, maybe this one will be the dominant branch. So I cut that there. Another stick. Here we go. Find some more sticks. I'll weight this down, and then maybe this one as well to get weighted down. Then you've got nice open form. And if we wanted to spur production, so cherries will grow on first year growth. So if we wanted some more branching, we can cut off, do some heading cuts here to spur these to branch out, and then we would get a little more fruit on these. But I think I've taken enough off this tree for this year. That first big limb we took off was pretty substantial. You never want to take off more than 1/3 of the tree. So we'll leave this for this year, and then maybe next year. These two look like they're going to interfere a bit, so we'd probably take one of those out, or just train the branches away from each other. Okay, so just let me hook my headphones back up here. So yeah, for the weighting them down, as I mentioned, you can, I just used some sticks that I found on site there, but a brick or a rock, tying a string around that works to weight it down. You can also get branch spacers that actually go there. They go, you put them up against the trunk and then they push the limb out. So they go at that crotch angle, and then they help spread it apart at that point. I've never purchased any commercial ones. I have tried to use clothespins, which you're supposed to be able to use to do the same for the same idea, and I've never had any luck keeping them there, or not getting sort of like damage on the bark from them rubbing or popping out or whatever. I find just string and something to hold the string down much easier. And when you use like sisal or some kind of twine like that, it basically just it removes itself. It'll break down eventually, and then you don't have to remember, especially for if if it's a client who I don't want to have to go back there in a year to just to remove the string and or remind them to do it. It'll just biodegrade and set the branch free at the right time. Whoops. So just a couple more pages on pruning, and then maybe we'll take if there's any more questions on the pruning, we'll do that before we get into the next thing. So, so renewal pruning is, so this is when you are planning ahead for that fruit production in a year or 2 years or 3 years. So they've taken this, this branch is producing fruit, and in the third year, because it's an apple pear, and then they've cut off these lateral branches. Sorry, it's hard to point here with my pointer without changing the slide. They've cut off these lateral branches to spur more fruit production, and then in the last image at the bottom of the picture there, they've actually removed that whole scaffolding branch that was fruiting in order to get a new one going. So obviously when you're doing this, you want to be thinking about the whole tree. You don't want to have no production again on the tree for 2 or 3 years. You want continual production. So every year, once you have fruiting starting, every year you'll be doing a little bit of renewal pruning in order to keep a certain amount of productive branches on your tree and not have all your renewal pruning happening in 1 year with then no production on the tree for 2 or 3 years. So timing, somebody asked a question about this. General practice is that most pruning is done in the late winter, February, March, April, before bud break is best, but you can do it right up into bloom if necessary. This is when you're taking out, especially larger limbs, is when you want to be taking them out to give them a bit more time to heal. And dead branches, things that are crossing. Early summer around the solstice is good for removing those, the vigorous shoots that have sprouted, the water sprouts and things that have come up from the pruning that you did in winter. So water sprouts are branches that go straight up to the sky. They don't follow regular branching patterns. You can look at a tree from a distance and they stand out quite a bit because they literally go straight up, and they're usually 2 or 3 times as long as the other branches on the tree. And just like the limbs that are below the graft point, they're not usually fruiting or productive. They just take energy away from the branches that are fruiting and that you want to encourage. So we remove those, and the best time to do that is around the solstice. And you can also pinch off if there's shoots that are growing really quickly. You can also just break the tip of them off, and then that helps spur fruit production on that limb. So and this is in the resources, on the resources page. There's a new book that, well, it's new to me last year, and so I'm just experimenting with this type of pruning, but it's called Grow a Little Fruit Tree by Anne Rolfe, and she talks about like really growing little fruit trees, and she says pretty much doesn't matter what your rootstock is, just as soon as you plant your tree, cut it back to 2 feet, basically 2 feet tall, and you think, oh my god, I just lost half the tree that I bought. But that's going to encourage branching at that height and make it more manageable for picking and maintenance and care over time. And you know, when you live in an urban yard and you don't have a lot of space, you can cram more in as well when you have nice small trees. So this is something I'm still experimenting with, but she also really emphasizes that most of your pruning should actually be done at this time in the solstice, around early summer solstice time, because you don't have such vigorous growth responses. Sometimes those water sprouts happen because you've done this pruning in late winter, and then the tree has all this energy stored up from last year, and it has nowhere to put it, because you just removed all these branches that it was saving this energy for, and so now it's sending all that energy into less wood, and then that wood is growing really vigorously. So if you actually do more of your pruning around the solstice, then you're not creating you're not stimulating the tree so much to respond like that. So yeah, I'll keep experimenting with that, and it makes sense to me when I read her rationale for it. And then in late summer, the trees are already actually entering dormancy by late July. So this is also a really good time to be taking out water sprouts, and to improve light penetration to get better ripening. And then also this is a good time to prevent fungal diseases like sooty blotch and fly speck. Right, this is
There's a few questions. Is this a decent place to stop for a second? If you're okay with that.
this is the last slide for pruning. Should I go over this one first, and then we'll do all the pruning questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So this just shows you how you would, like, over 5 years, you're pruning. So the first little seedling there, sapling, is at planting, doing a single heading cut to encourage branching there. And this is where Anne Ralph would say, you know, cut your tree back to 24 inches tall, wherever you want your branching to start. And if you're thinking about wanting a small tree and not having to use ladders to pick and care for your tree and stuff. So as soon as you plant your tree, you're doing a heading cut to spur some branching there. Second spring, you're opening up the crotch angles, taking off a few limbs that are crossing maybe. Third spring, you're going to have some water sprouts coming up because of the pruning you did the year before. So you're removing those, spreading out the branches. And then the fourth year, you're starting to pick those scaffold branches. So you're looking at the space between, from one branch to the next one up, and how far apart those are, and making sure you don't have that it's not too crowded and congested. So they're picking 4 or 5 main scaffold branches to work with, and then in the fifth year, you're choosing those final scaffolds that you're going to keep and doing a bit of some heading cuts to spur some branching and growth where you want it. Okay, so now that's the end of the pruning section. So let's take all the questions on pruning before we get into diagnosing problems.
Okay, so I am sometimes reading questions, so I apologize if it's a question that you've already answered. But one question is grafting only advisable for young trees, or is it fine to do them on mature trees as well?
Yeah, no, you can do it on, there's actually, yeah, it's, you can do it on any age of tree really, as long as the root stock, or the trunk is still healthy. There's just different techniques you use. So I don't remember the names of it. I do something called bench grafting. I can't remember what the terminology is for the other types of grafting, but there's definitely grafting you can do on older trees. And then you can even graft on, like, if you've got a trunk that has a diameter of 4 or 5 inches or something, you could graft 2 or 3 different varieties onto that, and then have those 3 different limbs coming up and growing into different types of fruit.
Okay, so similar kind of question. Someone says, we have 2 native Prunus americana which are in need of a good pruning. Is it still a good time for it? And we'd like to try various grass from nearby food forest trees, plum cotton, and maybe an elephant heart plum graft. That's good to do this spring.
Yeah, go for it. Yep, you can definitely still prune. I'm assuming they haven't blossomed yet. They're probably still barely opening up, getting buds on them. So definitely still good time to prune. And then yeah, just take some. You can take some scion wood and so this is where you want to try and have it, for the type of grafting I do, bench grafting, you want your scion wood to be the same diameter as the limb that you're grafting onto. So that's something you'll have to kind of figure out and eyeball. Maybe get your scion wood first, and then go to your tree and say, okay, where would this work? Yeah. So yeah, you should try that. They should be they're pretty similar. They're the same species. They should be fairly easy to have compatibility between them.
All right, great. All right, next one is I've had a tree in the ground for a while, a few years, and not really pruned it more than removing snapped branches. So what approach should I take? Should I try to remove a few large branches that are making the tree quite dense, or should I focus more on the smaller cuts to thin?
Yeah, I would focus on those larger branches first. Open up the form. Try and pick you know, 4 or 5 scaffold branches that are going to be your main branches that you keep. So this year, just take off. I don't know how big the tree is, but again, take off less than a third of the tree. Focus on those larger limbs, and getting the shape that you want in the tree and the spacing you want between your scaffold branches. And then next year and the year after, you can work on shaping those branches that you've kept and thinning them out a bit. But start with the big work first.
Nice, great. One more. How sensitive are fruit trees to black walnut?
Good question. So some are and some aren't. Apples and pears will not grow under black walnut, and cherries, sour cherries can tolerate black walnut better than sweet cherries. Sweet cherries are a bit iffy. It's a bit hit and miss, but uh, and apricots. So apricots are supposed to be able to tolerate them, but at my old house, I had 2 apricots. One was in the vicinity of a black walnut and one was not. And the one that was near the black walnut really never did well at all. The other one was producing apricots, and 3 times the size of the one that was near the black walnut. So in my experience, and maybe it was other site conditions, it didn't get as much sun there either. So but it was close to a hackberry and a black walnut, which are both allelopathic, which means that they produce a toxin to inhibit the growth of other plants. So sour cherries are your best bet, or like native, Saskatoon berries, choke cherries, pawpaws, plants that are more native to this region that have evolved to tolerate the juglone.
All right, that's all for now.
So that's all the questions?
There's also a comment from Brianne mentioning that at our tree depots, we've given away fruit salad trees that were a big combination of several different species of trees. So hopefully we'll have them again at some point.
Great. Are you doing the fruit tree giveaway this year, or not because of social distancing?
So nothing is for sure right now, and we're of course waiting for news and making sure it's okay. Our hope is that towards maybe late June or even early July, if it's okay to open our office up again, and we could have some depots where people could perhaps do some kind of contactless pickups at our office. It's just a matter of, can the office itself be opened again? So we're hoping to have some, but I cannot confirm at this time.
Okay.
Well, actually, I can say yes eventually, but it will be waiting.
Okay. Hopefully sooner rather than later. I try not to plant trees in July and August. They're much happier if you get them in the spring or in the fall. So now we'll talk about detecting and diagnosing problems. So the most important thing is to select varieties that are disease resistant. It's funny, like I have a different approach than a lot of my clients, I guess, sometimes, where they'll be like, oh, I love Macintosh apples. I want to plant a Macintosh apple. I think, well, you can buy Macs at the grocery store. Why don't you plant a variety that you can't buy at the grocery store? But the other thing is that a lot of those varieties that we see in the grocery store, they're grown commercially because commercial orchards have all sorts of techniques and tricks and things and chemicals that they use to keep the trees healthy. So some of those trees are really not very disease resistant. So unless you plan on using chemicals, and most people grow their own food because they don't want to be using chemicals, and they want to know how that food has been cared for and what it's been sprayed with or not sprayed with. So the first thing is select varieties that are disease resistant. And most nurseries will have that in their catalogs. They say, resistant to fire blight or somewhat resistant to this, and then there's charts you can get online as well that show you like the most, enterprise apple or is resistant to basically all the major diseases, things like that. The next most important thing is to encourage biodiverse, healthy soil and arboreal organisms. So we want the soil to have a good diversity of organisms in it, and we also want to colonize our tree with beneficial bacteria, beneficial fungi that are going to be living in the canopy and coating the leaves so that there's no space for the bad guys to get in. I can't remember if I'll talk about this a bit more in the holistic sprays, but in the holistic spray section. So one of the ways to encourage that soil biodiversity is that when you plant your tree, you can use mycorrhizal inoculants like Root Rescue, which is made by Earth Alive, to establish those beneficial soil relationships. Especially if you're planting in an area that's been turf grass for a long, long time, there's really very, very little mycorrhizal life in that soil. It's more bacterial dominant, and your tree's going to have a hard time getting food and all the nutrients it needs. So if you can dip your roots, I always plant bare root trees as often as possible. They don't go into transplant shock. They grow much faster and are healthier in the long run, even if they might be a little bit smaller when you get them. But then you just dip your roots in these inoculants before you put them in the ground. And there you go, you've got healthy, biodiverse soil. And then those little critters in the soil they trade for sugars. The tree gives them sugars and they give the tree minerals and vitamins and nutrients that the tree needs. So it's a great way to build. It's actually the fastest way to build healthy soil is by encouraging that exchange between the root and the soil organisms. If you've already planted your tree and you have to backtrack, you can still, you can dig up from a healthy forest. Just take like a cupful or 2 cups of soil of that humus layer, and sprinkle that around the base of your tree. Will help get some of those good organisms in there. The Earth Alive Root Rescue product can also be applied after planting, which is good because the mycorrhizal inoculant I used to use before, it wasn't as diverse. It didn't have as much diversity of organisms in it, but it also couldn't be applied at a later date as well. This one is applied in liquid form, so So you can add it afterwards. It's not as effective, but better than nothing. And then in the holistic sprays, we'll talk about how to colonize your arboreal organisms with healthy life up there. And then monitoring your trees. So just, bring your coffee out in the morning, have a walk around, and check on your trees every weekend or something to keep an eye on what's happening with them. The earlier that you detect a problem, the easier it's going to be to deal with. So basically there's insect pests and then there's fungal and bacterial problems. So know your enemy. Once you know what animal or insect you're dealing with, then you can know how to deal with it. So at what stage of growth is it damaging to your tree? Is it at the pupal stage, when it's a grub, or does it come and feed when it's older, or does it lay its eggs there? At what point is it damaging in its life cycle? And then at what time of year is that damage most likely to occur? Should you trap it? Should you try and repel it, or attract beneficial allies like ladybugs for aphids? Or should you use particular holistic sprays that will try and will repel it or will kill it? What else was I going to say about that? Right. That's just in the next part. So determine how much damage the insect is doing. So if it's a small amount, you're not selling your fruit commercially. It doesn't need to look perfect. If there's a few bumps and bruises on them and things, it's not the end of the world. And if you have a diverse ecosystem, if you have lots of other plants around in your yard that are attracting pollinators and predatory wasps, then eventually the predators will find the pests. So I've had some problems with aphids before on my currants, and I just kind of waited and waited, and they kept getting worse. And I knew that I had enough diversity in the garden that eventually the predators would find them. And so it was they've gotten to the point a couple times before where I've been questioning whether I should start doing some spraying or removing them in some way, and then a few days later they're virtually gone, and it's just because the predators have found them and they let all their friends know, and then they gobble them up, and then you're not risking harming those predators by spraying something that will also be harmful to them. Having a healthy biodiverse system is the best defense you can have, and having a healthy tree. So we'll get into that with the holistic sprays, but having a strong tree with a good immune system will really go a long way too. So yeah, so that's good for that. Fungal and bacterial problems. So fungal problems, unfortunately, once you've detected them, usually it's too late. So this is where the holistic sprays come in, and this is where proper pruning comes in to make sure that breezes can dry out after a rain event, can dry things out relatively quickly, and then the fungal spray, the holistic sprays will also help you get ahead of these before they happen. I'll go over a bit later in the presentation. There's from Michael Phillips' book, The Fungal Curve Diagram, and it shows you the times of year when the fungus is most active, and so that's when it's most important to get your beneficial fungi and bacteria colonizing the leaf surface. And then things like canker need to be pruned out. So unfortunately, if they get on on a major on the trunk or something, then you might lose the tree. Once they establish themselves, there's not much you can do to help to get the tree back to health. So the canker needs to be pruned out and removed from the site, not composted anywhere near the tree. Just send it to try recycling or somewhere to get dealt with. Oh, here's the fungal curve. So this shows the best timing for when different orchard tasks are happening. So you can see if you look at the roots, there's 2 times where there's a lot of root growth. There's in the spring, right when fruit is starting to set, and then in the fall, before the tree starts losing its leaves, there's a big flush of root growth. Brown, there's a bit of brown at the front and at the end of this image. Those show where there's a lot of decomposition happening on at ground level under the tree, and so that's when you want to add biology to that to help that decomposition, because that's also that decomposition is also dealing with disease organisms and squashing those before they get established. So the red curve shows the primary infection period for things like apple scab, rust, and an assortment of rots. So you want to be getting in there with your beneficial sprays kind of right at the beginning of that curve to cover the tree with good bacteria and fungus. So, and then the green curve shows you the best places to support that mycorrhizal fungi in the system. So that's a little bit later than the red curve. So it's in the spring as the fruit is setting, and then again in the fall once the tree is starting to lose its leaves. So we'll get back into tree health a little bit. The healthier a tree is, the better it will be able to fend off attacks and diseases. And interestingly enough, actually, a healthy plant will not attract pests. Pests can't, like aphids, grasshoppers, they can't digest the amino acids in a healthy plant. They are only attracted to plants that are unhealthy. So if you make sure you have a healthy tree, you're not going to have to worry about pest problems. You might still have fungal problems, but but you're not going to have to worry about little insects eating your tree. So most fruit tree diseases are treated with fungicides and antibiotics that destroy the organisms that are on the tree. Instead, what we want to try and do with holistic sprays is boost the immune system of the tree and colonize it with friendly microbes so that the tree itself can fight off the funguses and problems, and it's defeating the disease from within. Tree health is intimately tied to soil health, which I talked about a bit already, but there's a very two-way relationship of them supporting each other. And then the last bullet talks about that again too. So the soluble nutrients that are produced by microbes in the soil that aren't immediately used by the roots will feed the next generation of microbes. And those nutrients, unlike when you apply a chemical fertilizer, chemical fertilizers, the nutrients are tied up. They're not immediately soluble. They're not as available to the tree when the tree needs it. So if those nutrients are stored in the soil and in the soil biology, then the tree can access it whenever it needs. It's there and it's waiting and ready. And if it's not used, it just goes to the next generation of microbes, and then it's still there waiting and ready to use when the tree needs it. And then the plant roots give off carbon that keep the microbe population happy and lead to balanced soil and healthy plants.
Okay, before you move on, we have one question.
Yep.
It is back to about pruning fruit trees. So I have a pear tree that shot up super quickly in its central leader. What time of year would be best to prune the central leader to strive for a dwarf tree?
I would try. I would make that heading cut now before the buds come out on the tree. And then you're probably going to have some water sprouts and vigorous growth coming as a result of that. So then around the solstice, prune that out as soon as it comes, not as soon as it comes up, but around the solstice, prune out all that extra growth that's come because of that.
Great, thanks.
Okay. So Michael Phillips' book, The Holistic Orchard, talks about the 4 holistic sprays of spring. There's been, I mean, I don't know what year the book was published, like 10 or 12 years ago, maybe. So he continues to experiment on his farm and evolve. So it's modified a bit from what's in the book, based on information that he's passed on to me from what he's learned since then. So mostly the changes have to do with the timing. So trying to time between when your tree is just opening leaves. Tight cluster to open cluster is when the tree is just starting to green up. If you need, you can do some applications before that. If you didn't do a fall spray the year before, or if you know you have bud pathogens like leaf curl, bacterial spot, fire blight, or twig lesions and things, then you can do a spray before, when the buds are still just a 1/4 inch green or less. But it's going to be more beneficial for the tree if you've got limited supplies and limited time, and you can only do 4. Then do them at these times: at tight cluster, at pink, at petal fall, and at first cover. If you have extra time and extra resources, then you can squeeze one in before that, and then also between pink and petal fall. Then there's some other sprays. There's a 2-week period between that usually, and there's some other sprays you can do in there as well if you have the extra time and resources. Yeah, pink, I'll just explain what these mean a little more. So pink is when the leaf tissue's filled out considerably, and then the fruit buds have a little smile of pink on them. You're still trying to colonize the tree at this point with good microbes, and you can add trace minerals at this point to strengthen pollen tubes. Try not to spray on open blossoms, because one of the ingredients that's in the spray will be problematic for them, and also can be problematic for pollinators. You don't want to harm. If we're trying to create a holistic system, we don't want to harm any of the pollinators in our orchard or in our home orchard. There's more detail on this in the handouts. I want to leave some time for questions at the end too. So, and there's a lot to cover here with holistic sprays. So then at petal fall is, when the petals start falling off the tree. So this is where you're spraying the leaves, and the fruitlets are starting to develop at this point. You spray them to the point of runoff, and here adding some trace minerals can help get healthy seed development. And the last of the 4 holistic sprays is at first cover. So that's like about a week to 10 days after petal fall. And the fruitlets are just starting to show whether they've been pollinated or not, or whether they're going to fall off the tree. And here, trace minerals again can help with next year's bloom. Actually, it's an important time for merystem growth for next year's flowers. And this is when you would start spraying for particular pests as well, like if you know that there's particular problems on your property. So the base recipe, this is for a 5-gallon backpack sprayer. If you only have 1 or 2 trees, you can get 1 gallon or 2-gallon sprayers. I use a 5-gallon backpack sprayer, and it usually, I mean, for trees that are, I haven't been in London that long, and I've moved a few times, so I'm usually spraying trees that are 3-4 years old, maybe, or less, and I can do like 8 or 9 trees with a 5-gallon sprayer that are that size. So, and hit up with whatever's left. I just hit up my currant bushes and other plants in my yard to give them a boost, or the soil to add those those nutrients to the soil. So I'm going to go through these different ingredients in a little more detail. So neem oil, fish oil, effective microorganisms, and then liquid kelp. The neem oil is important that it's not water soluble. So if you want it to actually mix in with your solution and not clog up your nozzles too much, you need to emulsify it with soap, with dish soap, before you mix it in with all the other ingredients. So neem is from the neem tree, which grows in India and in Africa. And it's got lots of terpenoids and isoflavonoids in it that they're secondary plant metabolites that actually stimulate an immune response in the tree. So it helps the tree ward off fungal problems. And then there's also azadirachtin compounds in it that inhibit molting cycles of insects. So if you have codling moth, it's particularly helpful for that. And then the fatty acids in it are also very important to feed that beneficial fungi that you're colonizing your tree with. And to give a foliar nutritional boost. So the leaves in the tree actually intake nutrients through them. There's the stomata with which they breathe through can also take nutrients in. So foliar sprays can be used for that as well, to get a quick dose of minerals into the tree. Liquid fish oil is also, and the liquid fish oil needs to be a fish hydrolysate. You don't want it to be pasteurized. You want it to be whole fish that's a fish hydrolysate. This is also, the fatty acids in here are what's really important for stimulating the fungus in the soil food web and on the arboreal canopy, and then also for giving a nitrogen boost. So you don't want to be applying this in the summer. You can use it in the spring, but if you give too much nitrogen in the summer, then it delays the hardening off process of the tree in the fall and could lead to damage. Effective microorganisms are microorganisms that you want on your tree. They're the colonizers that you're trying to get on there to fill all those gaps so that the bad guys have no room to hang out and get booted off. They help with diversity of the soil. They help with diversity on the tree canopy and on the trunk. They enhance growth, yield, quality, and the disease resistance of crops. And there's a bunch of different types of bacteria and yeasts in a good effective microorganism. And you can buy these commercially in the resource, on the resource page that's in the handouts. There's a list of a couple of suppliers that you can get that from. Liquid kelp has lots of micronutrients in it, and also some key macronutrients: boron, copper, iron, manganese, and molybdenum. And because of just the way that it's delivered to the tree, it makes organic matter really quickly available, and the amino acids in the soil food web, the amino acids in it feed the soil food web and make for happy little colonies down there. So this is just an image of some backpack sprayers, since I can't show you mine right now. I have the one on the left, the 5-gallon sprayer, and then there's 2-gallon and 1-gallon pumps as well. That might be better if you just have a few trees. The competitive colonization boost is a slightly different recipe. I haven't tried this yet, actually. So I was writing an article for EcoParent magazine on holistic sprays this spring, and I had to contact Michael Phillips to get his permission to share some of the things from his book. And he said, "Oh, of course, yes, go ahead. And here's some newer information and things that I've learned," which was great. And so one of them was this different spray that can be used between first pink and petal fall, when you've got that space of time where you don't, especially if you have a rainfall event within that 2 weeks. Your sprays are good for about 7 to 10 days. So if you have a big rainfall event between those two holistic spring sprays, then you're going to have fungal problems coming out of those. So then you would want to do this competitive colonization boost. And you don't want the problem is that when the tree's in bloom, you can do damage to the blooms and then to your harvest, and you can do damage to pollinators. So you don't want to be spraying neem on the tree at that point, or fish oils. So there's another oil called karanja oil, which has flavonoids in it as well, just like the neem does, but it doesn't have the azadirachtin, so it doesn't harm good pollinators. It just stops feeding insects like aphids, but doesn't affect the pollinators. So I have not found, I don't know where I can get this yet. I haven't done a lot of research on it yet, but I definitely going to experiment with it this year, and it can be used later in the season as well, or even mixed in a 1/3 to 2/3 ratio with neem oil because it's a bit cheaper, and then also you're just getting a more diverse spray. So this recipe is the karanja oil, a lot more of the effective microbes, because this is where you're really trying to colonize all the petal surfaces and leaf surfaces and the newly emerging fruitlets. The blackstrap molasses just help the effective microbes activate them, basically. It's a dose of sugar to kind of kickstart them into doing their thing and reproducing. And then the seaweed extract has a lot of nutrients in it. So then once you've got those 4 holistic sprays on, and potentially your extra one in there, the competitive colonization boost, then over the summer you can be doing extra sprays. Those 4 spring ones are the most important. If you have the time and energy and interest, and or specific problems that you're trying to deal with, then you can do additional sprays over the summer, kind of every 2 weeks, if you want to. And especially that 30 to 40 days after petal fall is an important time for getting calcium and silica into the tree to get a good fruit size, to get good size development on your fruit. The handout has a lot more information on these different, like on the way, on how to make aerated compost teas, fermented herbal teas are interesting. They're very stinky. So an aerated compost tea is, if you've heard of Elaine Ingham, she's kind of the guru of the soil food web movement, and teaches about aerated compost teas. They're a little more tricky to get finesse and get the right mix of organisms, and you want to make sure that if you're doing them, that you're doing them right. Making a fermented herbal tea is super easy. You just fill a 5-gallon pail with a bunch of herbs, garlic, comfrey, horsetail, stinging nettle, wormwood. There's all sorts of them, and I've listed a bunch of them in the handouts and what their uses are. But you basically fill a 5-gallon bucket with those, pack them in a little bit, pour some boiling water over, and then fill the rest with rainwater, and let it sit for 7 to 10 days. With a lid on it, so not tightly but loosely covered, so that it doesn't evaporate too much. And it'll be a really stinky, slimy mess when you go back to it, and your husband might throw it out and be mad at you for stinking up the backyard. And if he doesn't, then you can dilute it, like 1 quart into a 5-gallon backpack sprayer, and that'll get a ton of nutritional value onto the leaves of the tree, and then they'll uptake it through the leaves. So for that calcium and silica, stinging nettle and comfrey are really great sources of calcium. And then the horsetail is a really high source of silica. And garlic actually, interestingly, helps. I mean, it's good for insect repellency, but it also somehow acts as a vector to help carry the silica and other nutrients into the cuticle of the leaves. It opens them up somehow, and is kind of a vector to get those in there. So Then there's also there's a commercial fungicide I haven't used before, but it's called Serenade, and it's it's applying the same principles. It colonizes the tree with the beneficial bacteria that's naturally occurring in most soils, so it doesn't harm beneficial insects at all. And then if you have borers in your trunk and you know that that's a particular problem, then you can make a trunk spray that's got a higher neem concentration at 1 to 2% instead of the 0.5% that we use in the holistic spray in the spring. And that would just go on the trunk. You wouldn't be putting it on the leaves. And you can also put it in the root zone right at the base of the tree. And the neem basically stops the eggs from or I don't know, sterilizes the eggs, and then also prevents molting in any grubs that did actually make it to that stage. It might also help deter Japanese beetle and stink bugs, but I haven't tried that out. I've read that. So any questions on that? That was a lot of information before we go into orchard floor management and then some fall care and winter care.
Sure, yeah, we have a few lined up. One person was hoping to learn a bit more about nut trees and generally how many trees you need for fruiting.
How many nut trees you need to produce nut meats? Well, typically it's also you usually need 2 as well. And I guess, yeah, I didn't go through this either because we're not covering everything about fruit trees, but most fruit trees and nut trees, you need 2 different varieties for cross-pollination. So like hazelnuts, you would need 2 different varieties of nuts. Pecans, walnuts, butternuts, you need 2 different varieties for them to cross-pollinate.
Okay, here's a good one. For someone that's new to growing trees, is there a company that sells the different holistic sprays pre-made and ready to spray?
There is nobody that sells them pre-made, but Whiffletree Nursery sells everything you need to get started. They have the backpack sprayers, they have all the different ingredients that you need. Excuse me. They have all the different ingredients that you need. I did sort of try and offer it for a couple of years as a as something I could do for clients and other people who had fruit trees and didn't want to invest in the time and stuff. But it's very difficult because the timing is so specific as to when things are in bloom or when and that changes from one cultivar to the next, and it changes depending on the microclimate in your backyard. And so I can't be like, okay, it's Monday, May 20th, and I'm going to, load up my backpack sprayer and go spray everybody's trees, because everybody's trees are coming in into the zone at different times. So it didn't really work. The best thing is to learn to do it yourself and get the equipment. One thing is that the quantities that they sell in, it's a good idea to find somebody to share them with, because some of them are best used within a year of purchasing them. And so you don't want to have them sitting around in your basement for 3 or 4 years. They're not going to be as effective or active at all. So, and yeah, they only come in, 1 liter or 500 ml sizes for some of them. So find a buddy to share the inputs with, and then get your own little backpack sprayer. And that's my advice.
Well, from what I know, it sounds like there's a lot of people who are interested in urban agriculture and growing fruit trees. So I feel like it would be easy to make some friends if you told people you've made some. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other thing. You could kind of get your friends and neighbors hooked on it. Be like, oh, so I have all this spray made up. Maybe I could come spray your trees, and then and then you can share your fruit with me. I'm sure some awesome trade relationships could be set up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Would you have any further resources for plant you would want to plant under the trees to promote more nitrogen, etc., or soil biome, so probably soil organic matter. The holistic sprays are neat, but I was hoping plants could support the different fruit trees. So what other plants can help, fix the nutrients?
I didn't hear, so after you said for getting nitrogen, I didn't hear what other things they were looking to get out of the plants.
Said for soil bio, so like, I'm not too sure, but I think it's just like as an alternative to holistic sprays, are there kind of understory species that can help fix nitrogen or other useful nutrients?
Yeah, there's lots of, so when I plant a fruit tree, I plant a guild of plants around it that are there to help support the tree and provide nutrients and pest repellent properties, and attract pollinators and things like that. That would be a whole other workshop in itself. Uh, and actually, the next eco-parent article I'm writing is about apple fruit tree guilds specifically. So go to your local Shoppers Drug Mart, or not, order it online, uh, and uh, um, and you can read the details about that. There's not really like a good online resource of all of the plants that are good for particular fruit trees, but basically for nitrogen fixing, specifically, there's larger shrubs like New Jersey tea or false blue indigo. Those you would want to keep kind of just outside the drip line. You don't want them to be too close to the trunk because they'll be larger. And they're both native as well. Well, false blue indigo is not exactly native, but the white variety is. And just planting clover under your tree or alfalfa is great. And lupins, there's lots of different nitrogen fixing plants you can plant nearby. And then um, pretty much all fruit trees benefit from having chives or alliums of some sort nearby. So onion chives, garlic chives, Egyptian walking onions. There's a variety of different ramps, nodding wild onion. There's all sorts of different alliums that are perennial, that are beneficial to pretty much every fruit tree or nut tree. They repel pests, and they also can be used in your fermented, rotting, stinky teas that you're going to make.
All right, we have a question about whey, which I think was mentioned on one of the slides, but when and for what would whey be used? They said, I'm assuming for introducing beneficial colonies on the tree, but at what time would that be helpful?
Sure. Yeah, there's more information about that in the handout, but it's basically a source of protein, lactose, vitamins, and minerals. It helps with leaf nutrition and calcium, of course. Um, the It has been shown in Australia to help reduce powdery mildew on grapes specifically, and they used it at a concentration of 2% every 2 weeks. So it's I think it's because it's getting that calcium. The calcium on there is inhibiting fungal spore germination, and it's helping keep the tree or the plant, grape, tree, whatever, healthy as well, keeping its immune system strong.
All right, one more question. What about planting buckwheat for nutrients?
Planting buckwheat for nutrients. Buckwheat's great as a cover crop. I haven't used it under trees. I've used it yeah, I think of it more as a field crop for green manure or cover. I guess I don't really see any harm in planting it under a tree, I don't think. You would want to cut it back before it goes to seed, or it can become a bit persistent. But well, actually, you know what? It also doesn't, it doesn't do a lot for the soil biology. It does have a lot of minerals and nutrients, and it's good as like a fast cover crop to prevent weeds and stuff from getting in. But it doesn't have mycorrhizal relationships like some other plants do. So it can actually inhibit the mycorrhizal relationships in the soil a little bit. So maybe I wouldn't put it under a tree. You could plant it nearby, and then certainly when you cut it back, put that hay under your tree. That would be a great mulch to put under your tree. Yeah, that's what I think.
That's great. All right, that's all we have for now.
Okay. So just a few more slides. I know it's almost 8 o'clock, but I think we've gotten through the questions pretty well as we go. So hopefully there's not too many saved up for the end. So orchard floor management. Ramial wood chips are wood chips that are made out of smaller twigs and branches that are less than 7 centimeters in diameter. And they have a much better nitrogen to nitrogen ratio than nitrogen to carbon ratio than larger than chips made from larger wood. So you don't have the same problem with tying up nitrogen in the soil. And they have a lot of soluble lignins in them that fuel the soil biology and produce really stable humus that is great for long-term storage of nutrients over time. So Michael Phillips talks about haphazard mulching is best. So having different piles of different thicknesses kind of scattered around your property or orchard, and having them at different stages of decay leads to really good diversity. You can also use things like rotting hay and straw bales are good for fungal predators. And it's been shown that trees that have are mulched have higher levels of micro and macronutrients. And mulch also, of course, keeps weeds out and helps to prevent evaporation from the soil and moderate temperature, and feeds the soil biology. And this wood mulch especially feeds the fungal biology in there, which you want around trees for sure. So in the fall, after you've done your spring sprays, you maybe have done some summer sprays if you wanted to, or if you had particular issues you were dealing with. In the fall, it's really good to do at least 3 of these 4 things to set your tree up for the following season. So especially if you have fungal scab, adding some lime around the base of your tree when 1/3 to half of the leaves have fallen will break the cycle of the fungal scab. Doing another dose of holistic spray when 50% of the leaves have fallen, that helps the ones on the ground start to decompose, and also target the trunk really well. You can double up on the neem and the microbes and the liquid fish to get a good colonization before things go dormant, and then also the neem can help with any dormant moths that have tucked into the crevices of the bark. Using compost teas at this point, whether they're aerated or anaerobic, is also really helpful for for boosting leaf decomposition once it falls, and getting rid of any disease organisms there and returning those nutrients from the leaves to the soil. Aggressive mowing, so mulching the leaves under the tree so that they break down faster and flipping them over to expose disease organisms to drying out in the sun. And then spreading compost. So for this one, you want to wait until the tree is fully dormant, where it's lost all its leaves, because otherwise you can stimulate some growth. So you can delay dormancy on it. So you want to wait till it's dormant, and then you can spread compost. So try and do 3 of these 4 things in the fall. And then For winter, there's two main problems we have in the winter. One is rodents, and obviously somebody on this call, probably more than one person on this call, has had problems with rodents before. I know I have lost trees to them on more than one occasion. And then deer, not as much of a problem in the city, but still can be in certain places. Um, and because we're on a webinar, who knows if everybody here is from London or lives in the city? We could be from all over the place, which is great. One of the benefits of being online. Um, so what rodents will do is girdle the tree. If somebody didn't understand that in the question before, girdling is basically where they eat the bark off around the base of the tree. But if they girdle it, it means they've eaten the bark off all the way around the tree. So a tree can withstand a bit of damage on one side or even half of the base, half of the trunk. It can heal from that. But if the bark has been removed all the way around the trunk in a circle, it's girdled, and it will kill the tree because it can't get the xylem and the phloem are no longer flowing and can't get water and nutrients up from the roots and down from the branches from photosynthesis. So there's lots of different types of tree collars you can get. Whatever you use, make sure it goes right down to the base of the trunk. They're keeping the vegetation short around the base of the tree makes it less it's not as easy for rodents to hide and get up close to there and nibble away. If they're more exposed to birds of prey and other animals, then they're not going to be as likely to run out there. Putting some sharp gravel around the base of the tree might deter them a bit because it's not very comfy for their little toes to walk on. And then also if you get a good snow year, stomping the snow down around the base of the tree with your feet can compress it and make it harder for rodents to tunnel through. Because obviously they can hide under the snow pretty easily from predators. So if you pack that down, it's harder for them to reach the tree. Deer are a bigger problem. You need in some of the public food forests we have in London. There's 3 of them, by the way, if you aren't aware, which is great. And we've, especially in the first one, the Carolinian food forest, we had a lot of problems with deer there. So longer tree collars, like the plantar collars, that go up like 5 feet are great for that. Deer can still reach 5 feet, so until the tree gets a bit bigger and less tasty, they'll probably keep nibbling it back to that point, and then it'll eventually be able to grow beyond that. You can put fences around them, but deer can jump 6 feet tall. So if the landing area inside the fence is large enough for them, if they have enough area to land, then they'll do that. So either make your fence small enough that there's not room for them to land, or higher than 6 feet. There's 2 different brands of scoot that you can spray on the trees to prevent them from browsing. And then there's Sepp Holzer is a permaculturist from Austria who uses a bone sauce. We were going to experiment with this at the Carolinian food forest, but it never didn't end up doing it. Somebody wanted to try it. It's a very elaborate recipe that takes a fair bit of time. It's like, anyways, so if somebody's interested in looking that up, that's supposed to be fairly effective, but it needs to be painted on the trees by hand. You can't just spray it on. So yeah, those are that's winter prep. So thanks everybody for attending, and it was disappointing not to be able to do the workshop in person and have it more hands-on, but we were able to accommodate 3 to 4 times as many people because we did it online, and probably people from outside of London and further afield, so that's great. We have a bit more time for questions or discussion if anybody has something to add. I don't know everything, and if I'm happy for other people to add some of their input or advice or things that they've learned along the way. And I'll let Kelsey kind of finish it off and close with any other questions.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And I totally agree. It's definitely interesting because if it would have been in person, it would have been more 20, 30 people. And at the beginning, we had upwards of 80 people. So it's definitely amazing to be able to reach many more people. And just thank you so much for not only adapting your workshop and making those videos, but she's also expecting a child very, very, very soon. So I know that will be the next focus.
Any day now, so
So,
we're lucky
yeah.
that the webinar happened.
Yes, I kept having my fingers crossed. So thank you. It's just amazing. But yes, we do have a few more questions. Any type of wood chips we should avoid using for fruit trees, for instance, cedar mulch.
Yes, very good question. Obviously, black walnuts. Black walnuts have the juglone in them. We talked about a bit earlier. They're allelopathic. They would kill your fruit trees. So yeah, black walnuts are the biggest one to avoid. Even like cedar, everybody loves cedar mulch because it smells so damn good, but really it's not. It's antibacterial. It's antifungal. It's not great for your soil. It looks pretty and it smells great, but if you're trying to build soil biology, um, it's I wouldn't use it. I just buy the cheapest. Like, well, okay, the best thing to do is just steal all your neighbors' leaves when they put them out on the sidewalk, as long as you know they don't have walnuts. And and store them and let you if you put them in a black plastic bag, they'll break down into leaf mold over the winter, and that's like an incredible mulch for your soil. Or just mulch them with your if you have a mulching mower, drive over them, make them small, stick them in some buckets or containers, and you can use those. If you're purchasing mulch from a landscape supplier, I usually just get the cheapest mixed hardwood mulch or utility mulch, it's called sometimes. And it won't have walnut in it. They won't take that. And it's just got a mix. The more biodiverse your mulch is, the more biodiverse your soil will be. So yeah, or you can use some straw hay. I'd love to invest in a chipper at one point so that I can make ramial wood chips. If you have a tree crew working on your street, just say, hey, can you dump a pile of mulch in my driveway before you leave? And they're usually happy to accommodate because they've got to deal with all that extra after they've chipped the tree up or the branches up. So they're usually happy to get rid of some of their load and not have to pay to dump it. Um, so um, yeah, that
Hey, oh, go ahead. On the topic of straw or hay, if you mixed it with goat, horse, or poultry manure, would that help for mulching?
would that help with what mulching?
Um, would it be helpful to put on your tree?
Oh, um, yeah, horse manure. Oh, I can't remember the other ones. Poultry manure. You can burn your. You've got to make sure that that's decomposed properly. I wouldn't add fresh poultry manure because it can burn your plants with mulch, any kind of mulch you're putting into your tree, please do not put it up against the trunk. Make a donut, not a volcano. I don't understand how you would drive by city trees that have been mulched in these volcanoes by incompetent people and they're basically killing the trees. So you don't want rotting things up against your trunk. There's several reasons, but the one reason you're going to rot your trunk, you're going to you want to have that pulled back like several inches from it. And there's a lot of feeder roots at the surface. Even if you have a taprooted tree, there's a lot of feeder roots at the surface that have oxygen exchange with the air. And if you mulch these like 6-inch volcanoes around the trunk of your tree, you're suffocating your tree. So don't.
Amen to that. The other one was goat manure.
Goat manure. I don't know. I think goat manure should be okay. Basically, like herbivores, like bunny manure is good. I know alpaca manure is great. Goat manure should be good. I guess goats are maybe not as herbivorous as some of those other hoofed animals, since they eat red shirts off your clothesline or whatever. But I don't think they eat meat.
Okay, this is an interesting suggestion. I have had great success with hanging Irish Spring soap on my fruit trees to stop the deer.
Oh, good. Great idea.
Okay, any recommendations for specific pawpaw varieties that grow well in our area?
Oh, I mean, you can get native seedlings like that are grown from that aren't cultivars, that are just seedlings grown directly from seed. Those would all do fine. And then, I mean, really, pawpaws are pretty. This is the extent of their range north, but um, I don't know of any varieties. I guess I haven't looked into varieties that don't grow, or cultivars that don't grow here. Any of the nurseries that supply Ontario, or that are in Ontario, like Whiffletree or uh, Heavenly Earth, or the pawpaws that ReForest London has, St. William's. Any of those nurseries in Ontario would only carry varieties that are hardy to Ontario. So if you're going to be ordering your pawpaws from the US, then I guess you would want to double check that cultivar is hardy to here. But I mean, in general, if you're planting, because we're pushing the zone a bit with pawpaws, there is a bit more of a risk if you're planting a grafted tree that you might have that it might not be as hardy to the winter. So if you're worried about winter hardiness, planting a seedling is your best bet. And the fruit variety, um, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? I've got baby brain. Um, the quality of the fruit on a pawpaw seedling will still be pretty good. Like they haven't been cultivated for uh, as long as we've been cultivating apples and pears and stuff. So they're not, the cultivars that we have aren't that far removed from the native seedlings. They grow more true to seed. They're true to, yeah. They grow more true from seed than do some of the other fruit trees that we plant.
Okay, there's 4 more questions. I know we're at 8 o'clock. It can keep going if we wanted to. Actually, I meant to ask this earlier, but if anybody is not from London, give us a shout in the chat box before you leave to let us know where you are. So I can either, we can get back to the people over email, or if you're okay to just stay a few minutes longer, we can just finish up with the last few.
Yeah, if there's just a couple more questions, let's finish it off.
Sure. All right. When laying down a branch, is there a specific spot to tie on the branch?
Right. Well, you don't want it to be rubbing up against buds. You don't want it to be too close to the tip, because you don't want to have an arc in your branch. You want it to be sort of halfway down the length of the branch, so that you're actually getting more pull on that crotch angle than just having the tip come down. Yeah, and tie loosely so that you're not so that it's not going to hurt the bark.
Okay. Next question. Our not-for-profit have trees on our property that are only 3 years old. How long would you recommend using gator bags for watering? Would the roots be settled enough now to let nature take its course in terms of watering?
If they're 3 years old, yeah, they should have pretty good established root system. If they haven't been babied too much. So if you've been using the watering bags, like to give them a kind of constant supply of water, then they might need another year maybe. But well, I'd say at this point, you could still use them, especially if it's a dry year. you could leave them on maybe, but you don't, what's more important is having less frequent, deeper waterings to establish a deep root system. So if you're doing lots of shallow waterings, you're going to establish a shallow root system. 3 years is usually a good time to where you don't need to be babying your trees so much. But if you feel like you have been doing more frequent shallow waterings, then maybe take this year to kind of transition it into less frequent, deeper waterings to try and get that deeper growth.
Okay, how do you prevent worms in apples?
That's apple maggots usually, and so one of the most important things is just controlling. They breed in they breed in the ground, so um, it it means that you're not. Usually, it means that apples that fall are not being picked up and removed from the area. So just having a clean um, base under your tree. Anything that falls that you're not going to use, well, anything that falls, pick it up. Either use it for applesauce or cider, or get rid of it, because that's where the larva will get into the soil, and then you'll have new apple maggots the following year. So if you get all that stuff off your property for a year or 2 years, you'll get rid of your apple maggots.
That's great. Do you have any tips for growing elderberry? Do you need to approach it with the same type of pruning and spray approaches, or is it more hands-off?
Yeah, because it's a native plant. It's pretty hardy. It's not usually, there are different cultivars, but they're not as finicky and sensitive as other fruit trees. I wouldn't worry about pruning an elderberry too much. Prune out dead stuff, and if there's branches that are rubbing. But other than that, you don't need to prune it for shaping or for fruit ripening and stuff as much. Good luck getting fruit off of it without having the birds steal it from you first. You might need to net it to get that fruit with some bird netting, but the holistic sprays certainly don't hurt. Like they're just boosting the tree immunity and making it healthy. So I wouldn't worry about pruning too much, but I would, if you want to have a good, healthy, productive tree, then the holistic sprays would help you get that.
Okay, and just a comment about the gator bags, they were only used as a backup to the dry summer weather.
Okay. So yeah, I'd say then you should have a pretty good root system developed by now with 3 years. I'd say unless there's a drought, like if there's a drought period over the summer again, then you could do some top up watering with it. But okay, sorry, I should back up a little bit. The other thing is, what rootstock are they on? If they're on a dwarfing rootstock, then their roots are also going to be dwarfing and aren't going to be ever going to be very deep. If they're standard trees, or semi-dwarf trees, then they'll have a bigger root system, so they'll need less watering. So if they're dwarfs, you'll probably still need to baby them a bit for the rest of their lives, but not as intensively as those first 3 years.
Okay, two more have just popped in. Any recommendations on dealing with squirrels? They get our baby fruit trees every year.
Get a BB gun. No. No, squirrels are tough. We have like 5 squirrel busting bird feeders that they still somehow manage to, they hang upside down and they do these crazy acrobatics, and they're very determined. Yeah, squirrels are tough. No, I don't really have a solution for squirrels. Plant extra so that you can share, or bird netting. You can put for apple maggot too, you can use these little socks, or stockings, old stockings, or you can buy little stocking socks to put on your apples so the apple maggot fly can't lay their eggs on them. Those would work for squirrels too, but they're just jerks sometimes. Like they eat stuff before it's even ripe, like tomatoes and apricots. And
You can only do so much, but you can certainly do a lot. There's a lot of really practical tips. Okay, well, I guess that's actually it. I should just acknowledge the funders on the slide there, the Ontario Trillium Foundation. It is thanks to them that we have the Signal Boost Initiative. And like I said, there's more events coming up soon. So if you liked this one, and you know, Jesse was just awesome. So yeah, next week there's one about native plant gardening from the Thames Tablet Land Trust. That's Tuesday next week at the same time. So easy to remember. And there's also one from Green Economy London Tuesday morning at 10 next week. So if you're interested in greening your business.